I'm Daniel Carter. I'm 29, and until 5 months ago, my life was well stable. I'd been working as a welder at a mid-sized fabrication shop here in Ohio. Good pay, solid crew, and honestly, I liked it. 7 years there felt like building something real. Then one cold Monday, the owner gathered everyone and handed out weird downsizing speeches like they were candy. Just like that, I was out. I spent 2 months sending resumes into the void. Welding jobs that paid anything close were rare, and the bills didn't care that I was in transition. The worst day came when I slid the last box of my stuff into my old Civic and handed the keys to my apartment back to the landlord. My folks said I could stay in their finished basement while I figured things out. We had a deal $400 a month, literally all I could afford working the floor at a local hardware store. I told myself it was temporary. And it was until yesterday. Yesterday morning felt different. After firing off what felt like my 100th application, I finally landed a decent welding gig with benefits and a solid salary. I was supposed to start next Monday. I told my mom over scrambled eggs. She smiled faintly, but didn't say much. When I pulled into our street around 6 p.m. that evening, tired but hopeful, I froze. There was a crowd on the lawn. Black garbage bags, dozens scattered across the grass. Some torn open my clothes, spilling out onto the wet ground. My gaming monitor leaned against a tree. It took me a beat to realize this was all my stuff. Mom was on the porch, phone raised, recording me. My sister, Becky, 26, was live streaming to her beauty tips followers, narrating, "Y'all are watching my loser brother finally get booted, my older brother, Mark." 31 was pacing around like some cheerleader to this whole spectacle. Dad stood with his arms crossed, cold and silent. As I stepped from my car, Mom's voice cut through the chatter. Daniel's 29, living like a leech in our basement. It's time for him to grow up. She spoke like she was starring in some reality show. Mark kicked one of my bags like he was scoring a field goal. Becky cackled, her phone angled for the perfect shot. And my neighbors! They watched, some recording, some clapping. The final straw, Dad walked down the steps and without a word chucked my spare car keys right at my face. "You're not my son anymore," he said flatly. "Real men don't mooch." The keys hit my cheek, the words hit harder. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just stood there, swallowing all of it, a tidal wave of humiliation crashing over me. And that's when I noticed something even worse. Some of my neighbors were nodding along. One shouted about time. I stood there thinking this morning we ate breakfast together. Last night we watched the ball game. And now this... But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this humiliation was about to backfire spectacularly. Because my late grandfather, a stubborn old machinist with a sharp eye for legal fine print, had quietly left me 40% ownership of this house in his will 3 years ago. They could kick me off the lawn, but they couldn't kick me out legally. And they had no clue. I loaded what I could into my car, head held as high as I could fake it, and drove to my buddy Mike's apartment. I couldn't even feel my face from the adrenaline. That night, I texted my grandfather's old attorney. "I think it's time to talk." Mike's couch was lumpy and too short for me to stretch out on, but I didn't care. It wasn't the couch keeping me awake, it was the storm of adrenaline still pulsing through my veins. I stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead, replaying every second from earlier that day, every insult, every laugh from my family. My mind kept circling the same bitter question: how do you get treated like garbage by the people who raised you and not completely lose yourself? When I finally dozed off, it was a restless sleep filled with half dreams of keys hitting my face and Becky's phone camera catching my every flinch. I woke before dawn, phone in hand, already scrolling for the number I knew I needed to call Mr. Harlow, Grandpa's lawyer. His voice was raspier than I remembered, older now, but he remembered me immediately. "Daniel Carter," he said like we were old war buddies. "I figured this call might come one day." His words sent a chill down my spine. Almost like he knew this family circus was inevitable. He told me to come by that afternoon. He was semi-retired now, but still sharp as ever. As I sat on Mike's tiny balcony later that morning, sipping burnt coffee and looking out over the peeling paint of a tired neighborhood, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. All the years of biting my tongue, taking their jabs, trying to keep the peace. Over. The house where I spent my childhood and where I had quietly hidden my broken self all these years, they thought they could just toss me out and keep pretending they were victims of a lazy, ungrateful son. That era was done. The attorney's office was like stepping back in time. Mahogany paneling, dusty law books, old maps framed on the wall. Mr. Harlow looked smaller than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp, assessing me like I was a puzzle he'd been waiting to solve. "Your grandfather thought this day might come," he said gently, pulling out a thick file from an old locked cabinet. He slid it across the desk, letting the weight of the paperwork land with a soft thud that seemed louder than it should have been. "He left you 40% ownership of that house, Daniel. And not just that, there's the vacation cabin at Lake Sheridan, and 35% of the commercial building where your father runs his renovation business. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through the documents, my name there in legal print plain as day. It felt surreal, this proof that my grandfather saw me, believed in me, even as my own family worked so hard to make me feel invisible. Harlow explained it carefully after Grandpa died. These assets passed directly into a trust with me as a partial owner. The family got copies of everything back then, but either they hadn't read the fine print, or they chose to pretend none of this existed. As he spoke, something inside me hardened. For the first time in my life, I felt something stronger than hurt resolve. No more shrinking myself to make room for their egos. No more eating their passive-aggressive comments for breakfast. No more enduring. They humiliated me in front of neighbors, friends, strangers on the internet, even thanks to Becky's content. They had built this narrative where I was a mooch, a parasite. They enjoyed making me the villain, but they forgot a simple truth: sometimes the villain they invent is the hero they deserve. I stepped out of that law office feeling taller somehow, like I'd finally stepped into my own skin. The sun felt different too, not so much warmer but sharper, like I was seeing the world clearly for the first time in months. But this wasn't just going to be a legal battle, it was personal, layered with years of small humiliations and conditional love. And here's where it got twisted that evening. As I scrolled through my phone, I realized my sister Becky had not deleted her live stream like she later claimed. No, someone had screen recorded the whole debacle and posted it on a neighborhood gossip Facebook page. Hundreds of comments, some mocking me, some sympathetic, but all watching my public disgrace like it was entertainment. Among them, one comment from a neighbor I used to shovel snow for when I was 12. Knew he'd end up a bum. That moment cut deeper than my family's betrayal. Because it wasn't just them, it was this whole suburban ecosystem of judgment gossip appearances. The same neighbors who'd waved politely when I was 10, who'd handed me $1 for raking leaves, now cheering as I got tossed out like trash. The irony burned. My grandfather, a man who had worked his whole life in this very neighborhood, had seen through all of it. He'd left me this quiet power they didn't understand because he knew exactly how they all operated. I spent the next day gathering my remaining things from Mike's living room floor. His 2 roommates weren't exactly thrilled to have me crashing there indefinitely. I could see it in their glances and hear it in their silence. The unspoken truth, even among friends, there's a clock ticking on how long you're welcome. I had to move fast, not just for revenge, but because I needed to reclaim my dignity and independence before this couch became another symbol of failure. The risk, though, was this: if I went after my family too hard, too fast, I could end up on the wrong side of this war. They were shameless manipulators, practiced liars. I knew that if I let my anger take over, they'd spin it into, look how ungrateful Daniel is. Look how aggressive he's being. So I kept quiet, played it cool. I filed the paperwork through Harlow's office, a certified letter formally notifying my parents that I was exercising my rights as a legal part owner of their home and other properties. Nothing loud, no threats, just pure fact, quiet, calm, devastating. The first wave of their reaction hit that same night. Missed calls from my mom, texts switching from angry all caps rants, "How could you do this to us after all we've done for you," to sweet manipulations, "Honey, we're just worried about you. Let's talk, okay?" I ignored every single one. Then Mark texted, "Hey bro, maybe we can talk like adults about this." The same guy who kicked my clothes across the lawn now wanted to sit down, not happening. Becky, ever the influencer, sent me a tone-deaf message. "Hey, hope you're not mad about the stream. My followers loved it though, but maybe we could do a family drama follow-up collab." That message alone almost made me laugh out loud, almost. But beneath the absurdity, there was symbolism here. The very platforms that enabled Becky's little spectacle were also giving me leverage. The receipts were public. I wasn't a ghost anymore. This whole mess was now documented, and documentation is power. By the 3rd day, things escalated. My father showed up at my new welding job. He waited until my lunch break, then ambushed me outside the building. I didn't even recognize him at first. He looked older, smaller, somehow diminished, though he tried to stand tall. "Daniel," he said flatly, "you need to come home so we can work this out." His tone was rehearsed, like he was reading from some internal PR script. I said nothing, just waited. Then he let the real reason slip. "Your sister found some paperwork about some land you have. She says it's worthless, but maybe it's better if you sign it over anyway, just to keep things simple." There it was, the mask cracking. That wasn't concern, that was desperation. In that moment, standing in my greasy work boots outside a welding shop that smelled like burnt steel, I realized the truth. They didn't just want me gone, they wanted my steak gone. Their entire house of cards was built on pretending I didn't matter. The second I asserted myself, their whole charade began to wobble. I smiled then, not cruelly, just knowingly. And I said, "Tell Becky to send me a draft of that family drama video script. Maybe we'll do a collab after all." The look on his face, priceless. I walked back inside, heart pounding, but not with rage anymore. With clarity. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore, Sai. It was about reclaiming space. My space. My name. My story. And as I picked up the welding torch that afternoon, the irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, literally welding things back together while my family's web of lies was coming apart at the seams. This wasn't over. Not even close. The next week unfolded like an old watch slowly ticking towards some inevitable explosion, each click a warning I could feel in my chest. Back at Mike's cramped apartment, I could tell his patience was wearing thin, not because he said anything, but because of all the things he didn't say. His roommates were barely speaking to me. I felt it in every awkward pause when I walked into the kitchen, every glance when I sat down on the old couch. It didn't matter that this was temporary. It didn't matter that I was quietly cleaning up after myself, contributing groceries, trying to take up as little space as possible. The truth was, as much as I was finally learning to stand up to my family, I still hated feeling like a burden to anyone. That self-consciousness was ingrained. Years of absorbing the Daniel as the problem narrative had made it instinct. And yet something had changed. A week ago, I might have quietly packed up and disappeared to avoid conflict, but not now. Not after what my parents did, not after what they said. Even their betrayal carried a strange, backhanded gift. It snapped me awake. It stripped away any remaining illusions I'd had about maybe they'll finally see me or maybe things will get better if I just try harder. No more. I realized something funny as I sat alone at Mike's tiny kitchen table that Tuesday night. My family never really knew me at all. They never asked about the welding jobs I'd lost, about the night shifts I took to pay them rent, about the way I'd been silently pulling myself out of the hole that the boss. They didn't even know my favorite song or the kind of beer I liked, or how carefully I budgeted so I could pay them every month, even while I was eating ramen 3 times a week. To them, I was just a backdrop, a supporting character in their carefully curated story about being long-suffering parents saddled with a deadbeat son. My existence served their performance until it didn't anymore. And when it didn't, they threw me out like trash and filmed it. What they didn't realize was that this very cruelty was what made me strong enough to stop playing that role. On Wednesday, I met again with Mr. Harlow. He wore a navy cardigan over his pressed shirt, and his office smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old books. A comforting kind of nostalgia I hadn't realized I missed. He handed me a thick folder labeled Carter Trust Documentation in his careful handwriting. Inside was more than just paperwork. There was history. My grandfather, it turned out, had quietly written protections into that trust so airtight that I could, if I wanted to legally freeze any financial transaction tied to the family home, the vacation cabin, or even the commercial property where my dad ran his renovation business. Every equity loan they'd taken since my grandfather's death required my signature. None of them had it. That meant they were exposed. Vulnerable. All the power they thought they had, their credit lines, their business leverage could collapse like a house of cards if I so much as filed a single legal motion. It was a symbol that felt almost too perfect. For years, they mocked me for my dented Civic. My cheap clothes, my modest life while living large on a financial house built partly on assets they were supposed to share with me. Their entire sense of superiority was built on my erasure, and now suddenly I was unavoidable. I was part of the foundation they needed to stand on, whether they liked it or not. But I didn't want revenge for revenge's sake. That would be too easy, and frankly, it wouldn't give me what I was really after: respect. Real respect. Not the fake kind you get when you threaten someone into compliance. No, I wanted them to finally see the truth that their power was always conditional, built on appearances, while mine, quiet, earned, invisible, was something real. Something they couldn't steal or spin. That was why I decided not to act immediately. Instead, I let the silence work for me. In the days that followed, I refused to answer their texts. I let their voicemails pile up unheard. The messages started aggressive mom's shrill demands and dad's icy commands, but by day 5 they turned desperate, pleading bargaining. Then, inevitably, the manipulation kicked in full force. Daniel, don't ruin this family over a misunderstanding. Daniel, we were just trying to motivate you. Daniel, we love you, you're just overreacting. Classic gaslighting. But this time I wasn't buying it. On Friday afternoon, just after I finished my first full week at the new welding job, good pay, steady work. No backhanded comments from coworkers who respected skill over stories. I came back to Mike's to find a letter slid under the door. No postage stamp hand-delivered. It was thick cream stationery with a gold seal from my father's lawyer. The letter was short and deliberately vague, dripping with faux courtesy. We understand there has been a misunderstanding regarding Mr. Daniel Carter's legal standing concerning certain family properties. We invite Mr. Carter to attend an informal meeting next Tuesday to resolve this matter amicably. I couldn't help but laugh. Amicably? After all the humiliation, the public shaming the live stream? Now they wanted amicable. The irony was thick. But beneath that irony was something else, fear. This letter, this olive branch, wasn't kindness. It was panic dressed in legalese. Here was the risk, though. If I moved too fast, if I showed my hand completely, they could still maneuver, still find ways to stall or obscure what they owed. I needed them not just legally exposed, but psychologically cornered. I needed them to realize that the person they had underestimated for decades was now the one holding the cards. And so I made my first real move. I went to the county clerk's office that Monday morning and filed a notice of beneficial ownership on all 3 properties: my parents' house, the lake cabin, and the commercial building. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't trigger foreclosure or eviction or even public headlines. It was a quiet filing, a small bureaucratic act, but it froze their ability to take loans or sell without my consent. The symbolism was sharp. While they played games in public, I was asserting my rights quietly, firmly, and unavoidably. I walked out of the courthouse that day lighter than I'd felt in years. It wasn't the revenge itself that satisfied me. It was the fact that for once, I was operating from a place of strength, not apology. I wasn't explaining myself anymore. I wasn't begging to be included. I wasn't waiting for crumbs of their approval. But the real test came that evening. As I stepped outside the welding shop after my shift, I saw Mark waiting for me at the curb. He wasn't alone this time. He'd brought 2 of his old high school buddies, the kind of guys who peaked at 17 and never let it go. Mark stood there leaning against the hood of his shiny truck, arms crossed, trying to look casual but failing. His friends flanked him, silent and big. I knew this playbook. It was pure intimidation theater. "You got a minute?" Mark asked as I approached. I didn't stop walking. Nope. One of his friends stepped into my path. "You really don't want to make this harder than it has to be, Danny." I paused. And in that pause, I felt something surprising. Not fear, not anger, but clarity. This was exactly the kind of scene my family thrived on, creating moments where I was the one who looked unreasonable, where my resistance could be framed as aggression. But not this time. I pulled out my phone, held it up high so they could all see it recording, and said simply, "If you touch me, this goes straight to the cops and straight to the internet. Your choice." The effect was instant. Mark's smirk faltered. His friend stepped back, slightly unsure now. The theater was ruined. The audience, my camera, had changed the script. "That's what I thought," I said, quietly slipping past them and walking toward my car. Behind me, I heard Mark call out, his voice cracking slightly. "You're ruining everything, Danny. You're destroying this family." That sentence hung in the air as I drove away. And it was true in a way. I was destroying the family, but not in the way he meant. I wasn't destroying its bonds. I was destroying the illusion they'd worked so hard to maintain, the illusion that they were the victims, that I was the problem, that I was powerless. And as I drove back to Mike's, I felt a strange peace settle over me. This wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't even about the money or the property or the humiliation. It was about freedom. About reclaiming a version of myself that had never been allowed to exist in their shadow. And yet, I knew this was just the beginning. Because if there's one thing my family taught me, it's that people who are afraid of losing control will always escalate. Always! And the next escalation was coming. I could feel it. The week after the confrontation was a strange blend of pride and paranoia. My welding shifts felt solid hands, steady arc welding humming beneath my gloves, but as soon as I clocked out, I braced for confrontation. Every knock on a pickup truck or sideways glance made my heartbeat quicken. I still kept that recording app open, pure muscle memory. And every night I slept with my keys inside my jacket pocket just in case. But underneath it all, a deeper fire was kindling. This wasn't just self-defense anymore, it was a mission. Then on Friday afternoon, it hit me. Dad's construction crew was working on the front steps of our house, the house I legally owned nearly half of. They were jackhammering the concrete, reshaping the entry one chisel away from history. I pulled up to my parents' street, slowed down, and watched from my car. The workers wore blank expressions, part puzzlement, part nerves, like they knew they were doing something delicate but couldn't quite say why. I got out, walked across the lawn, and the crew stopped. Dad came out, arms folded like a statue carved from pride. He stared at me stiff. "Renovations," he said flatly, "needed to update." I looked at the jackhammer resting against the porch. "You updated without my okay?" I asked, voice low. He didn't answer. The workers shifted. Finally, one spoke. "Mr. Carter, we just got orders." "That's not my name anymore," I said quietly. Dad's face flickered. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with purpose. I'm half owner now. You want me to sign? Or do I just watch you dismantle my stake? No answer. Just the hum of the jackhammer. And then it started again. Every slam of the jackhammer against stone felt like a shot in a war. I stood there silent, feeling the tremor in my bones. This wasn't just about concrete. It was a message. They were testing me, pushing boundaries, seeing how much they could take before I cracked. But I didn't flinch. I walked down the steps one after another and stopped at the curb when the jackhammer roared. Dad followed. His face was pale, mouth tightening like a crocodile's snap. "It's just a porch, Daniel," he said, voice brittle. I opened my phone. "Let me record," I said calmly. He swallowed. He realized this porch was emblematic. It symbolized his authority, his control. And he didn't understand why I could walk through the rubble and still stand tall. He paused, then said softly, "You think you can take everything. You think you're better than us." I clicked the record button. I never said that. I just want what's mine. And it was true. I felt no joy in this confrontation. No thrill, just a fierce clarity like a blade freshly honed. The next day, I got a call from Mr. Harlow. His tone was both proud and serious. "Daniel, they've applied for a building permit to extend the porch structure. They didn't tell us it's in your name at the county. That complicates things." My gut flipped. I realized my family's strategy overwhelmed me with facts, make me scramble to stop them, then make me look petty if I objected. They were playing to win, not to resolve. It was time to change the narrative. I spent that afternoon researching township permits, zoning laws, everything. I learned the exact clauses of our regional homeowners association. I drafted an email to the township building board and their neighbor of record department, outlining that any unapproved work on our property might violate code given my ownership status. I CC'd my parents so they couldn't claim ignorance. And I attached the recorded porch footage, audio my questions, their silence. The kind of quiet power move that sends ripples. Within 48 hours, a certified letter arrived at their house. The township placed a temporary hold on the permit until further notice. Work stopped. The jackhammer fell silent. For once, the house stood still. My action didn't tear anything down, it paused their control. That night, I walked by my own house. The porch looked half-finished, half-frozen in time, like a sculpture of tension and possibility. And I felt something shift in me. This wasn't just legal strategy anymore, it was becoming art. A public performance of integrity, a lesson in boundaries, a teaching moment for them. But it didn't end there. The next morning, Becky's Instagram exploded. A story went up, a short video of the paused renovation with a caption, "Looks like Danny finally got his hands in the house." Underneath were hundreds of comments, some mocking, some curious. Another neighbor posted a doorbell camera clip showing me walking down the porch steps, phone in hand. What's he plotting? Meanwhile at work, my manager asked if everything was okay at home. Several coworkers said they'd seen something about a porch fight online. I walked into the welding shop that morning, feeling naked, aware of the eyes, the whispers, the judgment. And I realized something important, and my fight wasn't just inside my family, it was about how people viewed me. About voices that said, "You don't belong." About suburban narratives that treat a quiet acoustic hum as deviant. And so I decided to lean into it. That afternoon when I was done welding, I walked home in my work boots and plaid shirt, simple, ordinary. I stopped in front of our house and pressed record. I spoke quietly but clearly into the camera. "This porch stands frozen because I said it does. If that makes me unreasonable, fine, but I won't apologize. I own half this house, and I won't let it be reshaped without my say." Then I shared it on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Slow drip without fanfare, just me and my statement. As the video went live, my confidence steadied. Every phone notification made me sober. Because going public like that wasn't just sharing a moment, it was exposing the fault lines of my story. And everyone, family, neighbors, coworkers, would have to choose a side. The next day, things escalated again, but in a different way. Dad's car pulled up in front of my apartment. It was late, almost dusk. He waited in the driver's seat for over an hour watching. I saw it from my living room window. My stomach clenched not with fear, but with anticipation. A confrontation was coming, but this time I wouldn't be the one stepping forward. As the sun set, he got out and walked toward the door, then paused, then turned and left without knocking. That was the real message, a warning without words. And I felt an odd ache of pity, not hate. Because I realized my father that night was fighting a ghost of control. Not me, not fairness, control. And that realization, it broke something inside of me. But also prepared me. Because I knew next they'd swing harder. And when they did, I'd be ready. The tension crackled like static as Monday dawned. I walked into the welding shop with a strange lightness, like walking onto a stage. You know you own, but you're still testing the audience. Manager Dave greeted me with a nod. I caught whispers between coworkers. He's owning it now. He went public. No hesitation, no shrinking. Something in my posture had changed. Still, I felt every eye tracing me, not in pity or scorn, just curiosity. And that awareness didn't scare me. It fueled me. I took my lunch outside. My phone buzzed. A local news crew had picked up the story, asking for comment. A neutral headline: local man halts home renovation via ownership claim. I wrote back calm and clear, happy to talk, just want to be factual. My heartbeat throbbed. This wasn't bragging, it was exposing the truth. I wanted their narrative to crash on every screen that mattered, from social circle to township board to that gossip page. And the risk was real: go public, and the backlash could be brutal. But silence would let them define me again. So I spoke. They arrived within hours. A reporter in a pressed shirt and 2 cameramen rolled into the parking lot. I met them under a walnut tree that cast mottled sunlight over the asphalt. We spoke for 15 minutes, me stating facts. I never wanted drama. I wanted fairness. I'm a 29-year-old guy earning his living. My grandfather left me this ownership because he believed in me. The lens clicked. I ended, if this raises awareness for other families, cool. Microphone off. I felt raw vulnerability, but also armor. I took a deep breath. What I didn't say but felt: if I staked everything on this moment, maybe I couldn't go back. By that afternoon, the story hit the local TV. I got texts from neighbors I barely knew cheering me on or cautioning me. Some said I was making too big a deal. Some offered support. My phone buzzed into the evening. I locked the apartment but kept listening. I realized something potent: owning the narrative meant owning attention. And attention can be leverage. 2 days later, I received something unexpected in the mail: a handwritten envelope addressed to me in my father's handwriting. Inside was a note: no lawyer's jargon, no threats. Just Dad's shaky script. We need to talk, in person. No lawyers. I'll come to your apartment. A raw invitation. No fanfare, no pressure. It carried symbolism: the gasping of a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. My heart hammered. I knew accepting meant opening a door to instability, but also maybe resolution. That night I stared at the note. A battle waged inside me: resentment versus fragile hope. My fingers trembled as I typed back: tomorrow 6 p.m. at my place, no one else. I pressed send before I could second guess it. And then I sat there alone as the quiet of the apartment stretched equal parts promise and threat. Because this wasn't a surrender. It was an escalation of a different kind, the shift from public stand to intimate reckoning. The question hung in the air: could he show up as a man or as the same father who tossed me onto that lawn? And I braced for the answer. At exactly 5:58 p.m., I heard the knock, a deliberate, heavy knock that felt rehearsed but uncertain. My heart drummed hard, not with fear, but with clarity. I knew who I was now. I took a slow breath before opening the door. There stood my father, not the towering, invincible man I remembered from childhood, but smaller, somehow older. His shoulders a bit hunched under the weight of this war he had waged and was now losing. His hands were empty, no briefcase, no folder, no bottle of bourbon, just trembling slightly at his sides. His gaze dropped immediately, as if unsure where to look. "Daniel," he said, finally, voice hoarse, like he hadn't spoken aloud in days. I stepped aside. "Come in." He shuffled in, standing awkwardly in my small apartment, eyes scanning the cheap table, the scratched floors, the half-empty bookshelf. I let the silence stretch, a deliberate reminder that this was my space, now my rules, my terms. After a beat, he sat stiffly on the couch. I stayed standing. "Why now?" I asked, not accusatory, just blunt. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his face. "Because you were right," he muttered. "About the ownership. About everything." He looked up, eyes watery, but not quite surrendering to tears. I didn't want it to be true. I couldn't let it be true. That admission hit me harder than any insult he'd ever thrown my way. There it was, plain and bare, the root of this whole drama. Pride, fear, the desperate clinging to control, to a narrative that let him stay on top, even as he destroyed the very relationships he pretended to protect. He continued, "I built that house, Daniel. Every nail, every beam, every corner. I thought it was mine." His voice cracked. "When your grandfather told me what he'd put in the trust, I couldn't handle it. I couldn't accept that he trusted you more than me." This was a side of him I had never seen. Not at holiday dinners, not on the porch, not when he handed me those keys like a slap. And it wasn't an apology exactly. It was more like a confession, raw and uneven, but real. And in that moment, something shifted inside me too. I realized I no longer needed revenge. I had already won, not just legally, but emotionally. I had stopped needing his validation. I had stopped needing to prove anything. So I sat down across from him and said simply, "You don't have to accept it, but you have to respect it. And you will, because I'm done letting this family rewrite my story." He nodded slow and heavy, as if every word carried weight he couldn't easily hold. Then quietly he asked, "What happens now?" The most powerful moment of all, I smiled, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just peacefully, and said, "Nothing happens. You live your life, I live mine. I'm keeping my stake in the properties. The payments you owe me will continue, but you and I, we're done trying to fix this." He didn't argue, he didn't shout, he didn't plead. He just sat there, absorbing the reality that for the first time he wasn't in control. Then he stood slowly and walked toward the door. As he opened it, he hesitated, one hand still on the knob. Without turning, he said, "I guess this is goodbye, huh?" I answered honestly, "Yeah, it is." And when he left, a strange, unexpected peace settled over me, not joy, not celebration, but relief. That night, I poured myself a cheap beer and sat by the window watching the city lights blink in their indifferent rhythm. No more performances, no more scripts. I had reclaimed something far more valuable than any house or dollar my agency. The next morning, my phone buzzed again, a notification from the county clerk. The freeze on the properties was officially in place. Every transaction from here forward would require my signature, a symbol, a fact, and a boundary all at once. But the final twist came later that week, a message from Becky, surprisingly sincere. "I know I messed up. Badly. I see it now. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." I didn't reply. Not yet. But for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness when I saw her name. Just distance. A healthy distance. Because this wasn't about burning bridges anymore, it was about deciding who could rebuild them and when and on what terms. I smiled at that thought. This chapter was over, but the next one would be written entirely on my terms. And that was the best kind of ending one I finally owned completely. Story 2. Last Thursday dawned like any other. I was on my way to the office, coffee and hand earbuds in, when my phone buzzed with an incoming WhatsApp image. It was from Harper, my fiancée of 3 years. We were supposed to be marrying in 5 months. Instead, I stared at her smiling face pressed close to Rafael Valdez, my college roommate. They stood in front of a departure gate at Ngurah Rai Airport in Bali. They both looked like they had just won the lottery. The caption hit me like a punch. "Finally free. Off to Bali with the man who actually knows me. Thanks for the honeymoon cash. Your mom's inheritance was deliciously easy to swipe. See you never. P.S. I'm pregnant again. Not yours." My heart stopped. 8 years of scrimping. The $62,000 emergency fund I'd built for our little beachfront villa, all gone. In that moment, I felt every heartbeat in my head, every breath labored, and then nothing. I slipped my phone into my pocket, squared my shoulders, and walked into the boardroom as if nothing had happened. On the outside, I was calm. Inside, I was on fire. I first met Harper at a charity gala for tsunami relief when I was 29 and she was 25. She wore confidence like armor. I was a marketing exec with a weird sense of humor and a good heart. We bonded over late-night strategy sessions for the fundraiser. Within weeks, I was planning a weekend retreat. By Christmas, I'd popped the question at sunrise on a snow-dusted overlook. We were perfect, or so I thought. Raphael was my best man at our engagement party. He coached me through the speech and even composed the playlist. Looking back, there were cracks I ignored. Late-night texts that disappeared when I walked in the room. Instagram stories of her solo dinners at odd hours. Raphael's sudden fascination with her favorite true crime podcast. And all those whispered logistics about surprise celebrations that were really for me. I blamed my busy schedule. I told myself love was messy, that trust meant giving her room. I was wrong. After the meeting, I slipped out to check my online accounts. 3 days earlier, someone had siphoned $60,000 out of savings. Another $2,000 went from my checking. My mother's inheritance money she'd set aside to help me finish law school was long gone. I closed my laptop, numbly tapped in a series of password changes, and froze every card. Then I called the bank's fraud department. The agent's apology felt like salt in the wound because this was a joint account. There's little we can do. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I was eerily composed. At home, I grabbed a handful of black garbage bags and started tossing Harper's belongings into them. Designer purse shoes she'd gifted me on our first anniversary and every framed photo of us. I left the bags on the doorstep of her sister Noelle with no note. No explanations, no goodbyes. Only the quiet slam of my front door behind me. Then I blocked Harper on every app except WhatsApp. I needed to see the fallout. I closed the blinds, ordered extra spicy pad thai, and poured a beer, my first real taste of freedom in weeks. Raphael texted me, "What the hell is going on?" I didn't reply. I waited. And for 3 days, nothing. At 3:12 a.m. this morning, my phone exploded. Over 100 frantic messages. "Harper, babe. I was joking. Please answer me. Raphael vanished. I'm alone in Bali with no ticket, no money." Harper's mom, Lynette. "Where have you been? Your daughter's in trouble. Come home now." I stared at my screen in the dark. A pang of pity softened me for a second. Then I remembered the Rolex Raphael bought with my cash, the boutique suite overlooking the ocean, the lie about the pregnancy. I breathed deep, no pity, no rush to forgiveness. I called Marcus, my neighbor and retired detective. He listened, then said, "Document everything. Screenshots, bank records, receipts, we'll sort the rest." I thanked him without emotion. I hung up and opened my laptop again. Tomorrow I'll meet a lawyer. I'll file a police report. I'll seek a restraining order, but tonight I will sleep, because when I wake, I'll start planning what comes next. I woke early the next morning, the meeting with Carter and Associates, junior lawyer, an oak-paneled office smelling faintly of old case files already looming. I laid out my evidence bank statements marked in red timestamps of those Dubai transactions, the hundreds of WhatsApp messages begging forgiveness. Across from me, the lawyer tapped a pen, eyes cool. "You have grounds for both civil and criminal," she said. "But each step escalates risk. Your name could end up in public filings headlines. Are you ready for that?" I leaned forward, feeling my pulse steady. My mother's unfinished deck blueprint lay rolled beside me, a reminder of what I'd lost and what I still had to protect. "I'm ready," I said quietly. The lawyer nodded, sliding a folder across the desk. "First, we file for a restraining order. Second, draft the civil complaint. Third, consider notifying Harper's employer under their morality clause." I picked up the folder, weighty with possibilities. As I left, a shaft of morning sunlight cut through the blinds, dust motes dancing like suspended verdicts, and I wondered what would shatter first, their lies or my resolve. 2 blocks later, I found myself in the marble lobby of Harper's firm, an architecture consultancy known for sleek skyscrapers. I pressed the visitor's badge, heart thudding, and was escorted by a receptionist who didn't know whose side she was on. I asked to see Ms. Montgomery, Harper's manager, a poised woman in a charcoal suit whose nod didn't betray recognition. I laid the WhatsApp screenshot on her desk, Harper at the Bali gate. Raphael's arms around her. I explained the inheritance theft, the pregnancy stunt. The manager's lips parted, then closed. "I see," she said. "Our code of conduct forbids fraud or damaging client trust. I'll review this with HR." I left her there, watching her gather that evidence into her tote bag. In the hallway, the echo of my footsteps felt like a gauntlet thrown. I just crossed into corporate territory, a risk that might free me or brand me, and I braced for repercussions I couldn't undo. That afternoon, I cornered Noelle at her apartment, Harper's younger sister caught between loyalty and guilt. Noelle met me with red-rimmed eyes, clutching a carved teak box she'd found in Harper's luggage. "I didn't want to," she whispered. Inside were dog-eared love letters signed our hotel receipts from Bali's most exclusive bars, even a list where they'd tallied the exact sum to siphon without raising suspicion. One letter began, "We deserve more than Austin's safe little world," scrawled in Raphael's looping script. Each torn edge and coffee stain spoke of plotted betrayal. I folded the letters carefully, feeling their weight. Back at my kitchen table, I opened my laptop fingers, hovering over the post button on a private support group forum. When trust becomes a vault, is it your treasure or your tomb? As dusk settled, I realized exposure might hurt them, but it would also hurt me, and I hesitated, uncertain if I could stomach the public reckoning. Night found me pacing by the sliding glass door, the empty deck frame outside bathed in moonlight like a skeletal promise. I sketched plank by plank, imagining each board as a memory reclaimed. My phone buzzed Harper's lawyer with a settlement offer, $75,000, handwritten in legalese, as if dollars could heal betrayal. I stared at it, feeling my chest tighten. I could take the money, rebuild the emergency fund, finish that deck. Instead, I typed a single line I decline. "Please propose $150,000 to include punitive damages." I hit send. My reflection in the glass stared back, calm eyes, clenched jaw. In that moment, I chose justice over closure. Outside, a stray breeze rattled the window pane as if warning that turning back was no longer an option. The next morning, I called Marcus for an update. He'd pulled call logs traced IP addresses used to empty my accounts, and most potent uncovered a voice memo from Raphael admitting the plan during a hotel lounge joke. Marcus emailed the audio file, Raphael's smug laugh. Harper's tremulous agreement. I pressed play, watching my reflection dissolve behind their voices. A clap of thunder shook the house, and I realized I wasn't the silent victim anymore. I was an Avenger, armed with every scrap of evidence. I forwarded the recording to my lawyer with instructions, add this as Exhibit C. The storm raged outside while I sat unmoving, absorbing the truth that I'd ignited forces neither of us could control. By midday, I posted a brief message on the community newsletter, building a deck in memory of my mother. Donations welcome story of betrayal and healing inside. Comments flooded in, some offering sympathy, others accusing me of public shaming. I smiled at the screen. Their judgments were collateral. My real target was the future I would build. As the first pledges clicked in $12, $25, $100, I felt something shift under the churn of anger, a fragile hope that from this debris, I could reconstruct something honest, something lasting. And yet, with every new name attached to my mother's dream, I questioned, could hope survive the fallout I was about to unleash? I woke to the hum of my phone's alarm, but this morning felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, like the moment before a play begins and the audience holds its breath. I sat on the edge of the bed, bare feet on cold hardwood, and reached for the small wooden token Mom had carved, a tiny deck plank with her initials in flowing script. It was my talisman now, a link to everything she taught me about resilience and integrity. I tucked it into my pocket and dressed in dark jeans and a gray sweater that still smelled faintly of her perfume. Today I'd deliver Exhibit C, the damning voice memo, to the small claims court for pretrial disclosure. It was risky. Once it went on file, anyone could read it, and the names Raphael and Harper might end up in the public record. But I reminded myself that truth is a beacon, not a shield, and clicked send. My heart thumped in my chest as the email whooshed away, and I realized that in the pursuit of justice, I might become a spectacle, yet I welcomed the glare because shadows only thrive in darkness. The courthouse lobby was a study in contrast, sleek glass walls reflecting marble columns, silent as a mausoleum but charged with unspoken dramas. I checked in at the desk, handed over my papers, and sat in the waiting area, clutching my portfolio. Around me, other claimants fidgeted, some in crisp suits, others in worn hoodies. It struck me how the scales of justice weighed differently depending on your shoes, your accent, your luck. I felt the old pang of insecurity that maybe my standing would tilt if they saw me as the jilted fiancé, not the wronged party. But then I thought of Mom's deck blueprint. All those afternoons she spent teaching me geometry with the pencil in her slender fingers, and the doubt seeped away. When the clerk called my name, I stood tall, no tremor in my voice as I handed over each exhibit. As I left the counter, I felt those polished floors shift beneath me as if the building itself was realigning to bear witness. Back on the street, rain began to fall in fine threads. I didn't have an umbrella, but I let the drops blur my vision. Tears and rain were interchangeable now. I ducked into a nearby cafe with steam spiraling from its windows, ordered a black coffee, and took out my phone. The community newsletter's donation page had swelled overnight. Dozens chipped in toward rebuilding that deck. Each contribution was more than money. It was a testament to collective faith in healing and accountability. Yet buried beneath the comments of solidarity, I found a few sharp notes. Why air dirty laundry? Public shaming is toxic. Social media was a battlefield of beliefs. Some saw my battle as noble, others as cruel self-promotion. I sipped the coffee, the bitterness settling in my chest like resolve. Was I a crusader or a showboat? I realized the line between justice and vengeance is finer than a plank of teak, and I would have to tread it carefully. Then my phone buzzed, Harpers Manager asking to meet. I left the cafe under a sky that spat drizzle and hail together, as if nature itself was undecided. The manager agreed to see me in her office that afternoon. When I arrived, she offered me a chair beside her minimalist desk. Sunlight filtered through slats, casting parallel lines like prison bars across her polished floor. She slid a thick envelope toward me, Harper's resignation letter, effective immediately, citing irreconcilable personal differences. No apology, no admission of guilt, just that cold phrase. And inside was a check for $60,000 from Harper herself made out to me. I lifted the pen she'd left behind, sleek and black, and paused. Taking the check would close one chapter, but it would also erase the public record of her wrongdoing if we agreed to drop civil charges. I looked at the rain-streaked window at my reflection divided by those slats. Could I accept closure at the cost of accountability? I signed the letter acknowledging receipt, but circled the clauses we'd need to renegotiate. When I stood to leave, I felt the weight of choice press on me, peace bought or truth preserved. That evening, I found Noelle on her balcony, the air crisp with twilight. She handed me a small bundle of photographs, scenes from Harper and Raphael's trip images. I'd never seen Harper laughing so naturally. It broke my heart, Raphael's arm around her like a promise. Noelle's voice trembled. I thought if you saw what she looked like happy, you'd drop everything. My hands shook as I held the glossy pictures. I saw the betrayals written in their smiles, but also the spark that had once drawn me to her. I wanted to crumple them, but instead I laid them out on my desk at home like war maps. Each photo became an exhibit in my mind, the way light hit her face, the tilt of his chin. I realized forgiveness isn't about forgetting pain, but about choosing which memories to carry forward. I burned incense beside the photos, watching smoke spiral upward, the past dissolving into air, and my heart clearing space for something uncharted. Late into the night, I drafted the final version of the civil complaint. Paragraph after paragraph laid out my losses, the inheritance, the honeymoon fund, emotional distress. But at the end, I added something new, a section on restorative justice, proposing that Harper and Raphael volunteer at the Tsunami Relief Center, where we first met under supervision. My soul recoiled at the thought of offering grace, yet I included it because I believe people can transform when confronted with the wreckage they create. I hit print and watched the pages slide out in a neat stack. Tomorrow I'd file it and secure a court date. Sitting alone with the soft whir of the printer, I wondered, could rebuilding someone else's broken world mend mine? And if they refused, would I refuse to let go of my own anger? The pages lay before me, crisp and final, as I braced for the answer that would define what comes next. The courthouse was a cold place no matter how many times I walked through its wide, intimidating doors. The air was thick with too many stories, each one more tangled than the last. I could almost feel the weight of history in its gray walls. Today, though, I wasn't just a visitor, I was part of the drama unfolding. I arrived early, heart beating steadily, knowing this wasn't just a legal battle. This was the final act, the moment the truth would be exposed, no matter how uncomfortable. As I sat in the waiting area, the smell of stale coffee and worn-out leather filled the space. I could hear the murmur of voices around me, each person with their own quiet urgency, their own reason for being here. It made me feel small and yet impossibly large at the same time, as if everything I had endured up until this point had led me to this singular moment. I wondered if they could see it in my eyes, the weight of everything I was about to drop on the court on them. The doors swung open, and I followed the bailiff into the courtroom, a cold, sterile room where everything seemed so final. The judge, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, looked over the papers in front of him without a hint of emotion. I was used to that, the detached professionalism. What I wasn't used to was the dull ache in my chest as I looked at Harper sitting across from me, her hands tightly clasped on the table. She'd traded her designer clothes for a simple dress, her makeup understated as though she'd turned herself into someone else entirely. But I saw through it. Beneath that careful mask, the same woman who had betrayed me sat there. I could see the faint tremor in her fingers, the eyes that couldn't quite meet mine. That's when I realized I didn't need to hate her anymore. The person I had once loved was now a ghost, something I had to bury to move on. But Raphael was the true wild card, standing beside her like a shadow waiting for me to make the first move. I could feel his gaze on me, a mix of guilt and defiance that twisted in the pit of my stomach. As the judge asked us to present our cases, I took a deep breath. This was it. The truth was about to break free, whether they were ready or not. The civil case unfolded like a cruel game of chess. Each move calculated, every word a weapon in a carefully constructed narrative. My lawyer began presenting the evidence, the text messages, the bank records, the voice memo. Harper's lawyer tried to paint me as the villain, the controlling partner who refused to let Harper live her life, but I knew the truth had its own power. I could feel the sting of their words, their attempts to twist my life into something it wasn't, but I let it wash over me. There was no need to defend myself. I had nothing to hide. I watched Harper's face grow increasingly pale as each piece of evidence fell into place. And when the video of her and Raphael laughing about their plan to take everything from me was shown to the judge, I saw her crumble. Her shoulders slumped, her posture faltered, and for the first time since all of this began, I saw vulnerability not in her, but in the life we had built, disintegrating into dust. It was surreal watching her fall apart when it was clear I had already moved on. But that's the thing about betrayal. It changes you, molds you into someone unrecognizable, someone you never thought you could become. And yet here I was, stronger, more focused and resolute. The courtroom felt smaller now. The weight of the truth hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Harper's lawyer tried to pull at the strings of sympathy, suggesting that what had happened was just a mistake, a moment of weakness, a rash decision made in the heat of a fleeting romance. But the judge wasn't buying it. As he looked at the evidence, his eyes narrowed. He didn't need to say much. His silence was loud enough. And then in that stillness, I realized something important. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about Harper or Raphael anymore. This was about me. The man I had become after everything had been taken from me after every lie had unraveled before my eyes. I had no idea when it happened, but somewhere along the way, I had stopped being the victim. I had stopped begging for answers, stopped searching for closure. The moment I started fighting back, the moment I took control, I became someone I could respect. And in this room in front of strangers, I realized that power came not from winning, but from knowing I had the courage to stand up when they thought I would fall. After what felt like hours, the judge called for a recess. I stepped outside the courtroom, my legs shaky from the emotional toll, but grounded in something I couldn't name. I walked down the hall, the sound of my footsteps echoing, feeling the weight of each step. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Noelle. I'm proud of you. This is more than justice. This is you taking your life back. The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so long feeling like a ghost in my own life, like I was losing myself in a battle that wasn't even mine to fight. But Noelle was right. This wasn't just about getting money back. This wasn't just about winning the case. This was about reclaiming everything I had lost, about finding myself again in a world that had left me behind. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. The battle wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next. When the hearing resumed, everything moved in a blur. The defense's last-ditch attempt at a settlement came through a measly $80,000. They must have thought I'd bite, that I'd settle for something that paltry, something that couldn't even begin to cover what they'd taken from me. I didn't even hesitate. No, I said, my voice steady, unwavering. The judge's gaze flicked between us, an unreadable expression in his eyes. He knew just as I did that this was about far more than money. It was about dignity, respect, and the consequences of betrayal. As he called for the final decision, I stood, my heart a quiet drumbeat in my chest. What I wanted now was finality. What I needed was closure, the kind that didn't come with a check, but with a commitment to move forward. Whatever happened next, I knew I was done with them. Done with their lies, their manipulation. The future was mine to build brick by brick. But as the gavel struck, signaling the end of this chapter, something twisted inside me, an unfamiliar echo. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I was certain I was no longer afraid of it. The storm was over, but I was still standing. Story 2, I'm Alex Chen, 31, and last Tuesday night, I got a message that blew my world apart. It was from Sabrina, my fiancée of 3 years, and it wasn't words, it was a video. In it, she was on a little cruiser in Santorini wearing my anniversary dress. She was kissing some handsome Italian guy I'd never met. He had dark hair, a tailored blazer, and a smile that said he knew exactly what he was doing. I watched it twice. Then I sat on my couch in disbelief, clutching the emerald ring I'd inherited from my grandmother. My mind went back 6 months. That was when I proposed. I'd scraped together most of my savings to buy a custom ring, a deep green emerald set in rose gold just like Grandma's. Zoe Carrington, our wedding planner, and an old college friend had warned me it was risky, but Sabrina always said she hated boring diamonds. I thought I'd nailed it. I remember how her eyes lit up that night like the first line of code finally compiling. We met at a midnight hackathon. I was leading the back-end team for Ridgeway Tech. She was head of front-end at Pixelwave. Our organizers merged us halfway through because they thought our projects fit. I still laugh remembering how Mark Caldwell, my roommate and teammate, got roped into our endless debates about database schemas versus CSS frameworks. By hour 36, we were all delirious and somehow ended up celebrating our MVP award in the server room with a bottle of warm soda and a kiss I didn't even see coming. Fast forward to last month, Sabrina flew off to Rome and Mykonos for a girls' reconnection trip with her college friends Lana, Mia, and Sophia. I really wanted to go. My deadline at Ridgeway was brutal, though. Priya Kapoor, my travel agent friend, offered to rebook my tickets on a moment's notice, but I told her no. I'd been looking forward to a quiet weekend with them once the wedding invites went out. Instead, I stayed home grinding through Python scripts while Sabrina packed that emerald green silk dress I'd bought her. I remember how I imagined her smiling in narrow alleys, twirling under fairy lights, taking endless selfies for Instagram. I even texted her a photo of me wearing the tuxedo I'd ordered for our engagement shoot. Save me some gelato? Yeah. She replied with a string of heart emojis and sent me a snap of her boarding pass. Everything looked perfect. At least that's what I thought. Then came the video. I was debugging at my desk when my phone buzzed. The notification said video message from Sab. I braced myself for shaky footage of her showing off the Trevi fountain at 2 a.m. Maybe tipsy, maybe funny. Instead, it was her. In my dress. Wrapping her arms around this guy with a golden tan and a name tag that read Capri Charters. They were pressing close under the moonlight, my green dress catching every glint of the yacht's floodlights. She smiled at the camera and mouthed, "Meet Mateo." He treats me right. My chest tightened. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. And then just as I was trying to process, my phone dinged again. A text from her. Found someone who actually values me. He owns 3 companies and a yacht. Enjoy your cramped apartment and your code. Been fun. Rings on your table. Scrap it for cash. I stared at it. 3 years. 3 years of trust late-night talks about APIs and architecture, thinking we were building something real. And she ends it with a video of her betrayal in a single text. I felt a rage boil up, but oddly I stayed calm. I didn't text back, I didn't call, I just sat there breathing deeply. That quiet moment of clarity came when I thought of the last few months. How she'd guarded her phone like it was nuclear. How she'd stayed late at front-end meetups for networking, then come home smelling like expensive soap. How she'd complained about our tiny one-bedroom in Eastwood, my beautiful apartment that I'd spent weekends fixing up. I remembered seeing her on Instagram tagging perfect cafe shots with work trip, always glossing over where she really was. Then I recalled my airline login. I'd bought her return ticket on my corporate status account. It was time. I logged into the airline portal. It took 3 clicks to cancel her flight home. No alerts, no calls, just a silent void where her booking had been. Next, I went to our joint bank account online. There it was small withdrawals over the past 6 months, $200 here, $300 there, enough to hint she'd been siphoning money off for this trip. And the joint credit card maxed out on luxury linens, who knows what, and that emerald green dress she wore in the video. I grabbed my phone again and called Palazzo Mare, the boutique hotel in Santorini where she'd booked her stay. The manager Luigi answered with a friendly buonasera. I told him there'd been an issue with the card on file and that he'd need a new authorization tomorrow or she'd have to check out. He sympathized, shook his head, and agreed. No muss, no fuss. By then it was 2 a.m. I hadn't slept. I sank onto my couch, looking at the empty dress hanging in my closet and the ring sitting on the console. My phone buzzed 10 times, missed calls, angry voicemails, panicked texts from Sabrina begging for help. She said the manager was threatening police, that she'd sold her Rolex to cover one more night, that she was stranded and scared and alone. Each message chipped away at my anger until I realized just how clear I could think when I wasn't blinded by betrayal. I took screenshots of everything, the video, her final text, her cries for money. I emailed them to myself on a burner account and backed them up in the cloud. Then I messaged Mark Pack-a-Bag. I need advice. And ice cream. He replied within seconds. On my way. Bring the whiskey. His loyalty was immediate. That belt and suspender support helped me feel human again. The ring stayed where it was on my desk, gleaming with promise and pain. The dress still hung in the closet, and me, I was sitting in the quiet aftermath of a perfect storm. I'd cut her off at the Source Flight Hotel funds, but that was only step 1. I knew there was more to uncover. Call logs, DMs, hidden accounts. Sabrina had been planning this for months, and now so was I. I poured a glass of whiskey, put on some music, and set my sights on part 2 of this saga. Because you don't just get a breakup like this and walk away. You strategize, you document, you build an arsenal of evidence. And most important, you reclaim your peace. This was after midnight. The worst was over, the quiet before the storm. And I, Alex Chen, was just getting started. Mark showed up at 3 a.m. with a bottle of whiskey and a fatigued grin. I texted him an hour before need backup for an emergent harassment case, and here he was settling onto my couch beside the scattered scraps of our evidence. I laid out the flight cancellation screenshots, the bank statements showing her quiet withdrawals, and that video of Sabrina in my emerald green dress on the cruiser. Then I told him about the secret phone I'd discovered in her yoga bag and how I'd breached its cloud backup. It felt ethically gray, but after betrayal, you justify anything to find the truth. In those folders were months of DMs between her and Mateo, plotting dates and fantasizing about a better life. Each message calling me a loving code monkey who didn't understand real ambition stung like acid, but it also ignited a fire in me. I remembered Dad's words in our cramped study code is binary. Life isn't. Learn the logic so you can manage chaos. So I pored over photo timestamps, spotted the same chipped coffee mug in her Santorini selfies that sits in our kitchen, and collected every breadcrumb she thought she'd hidden. Every symbol, my grandmother's emerald, the silk dress, that gelato cone had been weaponized against me, but they backfired spectacularly. In that dim room, I felt fury turn to focus. I wasn't a victim waiting for justice. I was a strategist crafting my counterstrike. But that hack alone wasn't enough to expose her final secret, and I knew the next move would have to be bolder. In the gray light of dawn, I launched Phase 2, turning her world upside down. I used the MAC address from that secret phone to triangulate its last known hotspot, her friend's villa 2 miles from the marina, and tapped into an online community that specializes in digital footprinting. Within hours, I'd traced Mateo's charter company registration number to Capri Charters, a half-legit, half-hustle family outfit. Posing as a travel writer, I called Profiling Luxury Yacht Experiences Insider Scoop on Captain Mateo. The reply came bluntly, "He's here, but don't expect yachts or investors, just selfie ops for tourists." That cut deep. While Sabrina pitched him as a modern Casanova with 3 companies, he was a carnival barker selling illusions. I felt a pang of pity both for her gullibility and the emptiness of a life built on glittering lies. Ambition without integrity is like code without comments, unreadable and dangerous. I grabbed screenshots of our exchange and the scraped company data, then forwarded everything to Land's Hotel back in Eastwood, flagging his shady credentials to their legal team. They thanked me for identifying a potential fraudster and promised to watch out for chargebacks. As I closed my laptop, I realized Sabrina hadn't just chased a man, she'd chased an idea sold by influencer culture, a promise that luxury equals worth. That twisted realization closed the first act of my counterattack and opened another. By evening, whispers of our drama trailed me into a coffee shop. Isn't that the guy whose fiancée ran off to Greece? I felt exposed, but I had more to do. I called Sabrina's father, Gregory, under the guise of a concerned fiancé. His voice trembled when I described her video and my discoveries. I heard muffled sobs in the background. He admitted they'd always admired my stability, but worried Sabrina saw me as too safe, too predictable. My heart sank. Predictability had become a crime. Between hushed apologies, he promised they'd handle her. I agreed, though I knew it meant they'd bail her out. Symbolically, my grandmother's ring felt like a millstone around my neck. I climbed to the rooftop, Eastwood's neon skyline flickering like unfinished code, random, beautiful, alive. I slipped the ring off, turning it in my palm until the facets caught a stray streetlight. Could an heirloom carry the weight of disillusionment? I didn't wait for an answer. I laid it on the ledge, a silent monument to a love that fractured. The wind tugged at my jacket as I descended the fire escape, and when I reached the ground, the ring was gone, snatched by night's breeze or something darker. I wasn't prepared for that twist, and I didn't know who or what had taken it. Morning came with an empty finger's worth of velvet lining where that ring had rested. I scanned the CCTV footage from the fire escape camera. A shadow flickered past, tall and unhurried, resembling someone in Sabrina's coat. My blood ran cold. Had she come back, or was someone else reclaiming my family's heirloom? I reached out to Priya, a cyber forensic analyst, with one message. Run pattern detection on security cams within 2 blocks. Her reply arrived with a still frame of a hooded figure descending the fire escape in slow motion. It confirmed my suspicion someone was playing their own game with my ruins. Then an email popped in from the law firm. Representing Sabrina, they demanded her ring's return at once or threatened suit for emotional distress. Irony struck. She lost my ring and now she wanted it back. I shot off a curt reply, "Come get it," attaching the screenshot of her Santorini text. A calm settled over me that surprised me. Minutes later, I tore open another envelope from the courthouse, a preliminary injunction alleging I'd unlawfully evicted her and destroyed her property. The language was clinical, but the threat was real. A public trial could bury me in fees and publicity. I called my lawyer friend Ella, but her voicemail said she'd be in court all day. I thought of the ring, the dress, the plane ticket, each a casualty of this war. Dad's voice echoed again, "Never surrender the narrative." With trembling fingers, I tapped out a text, "Meet me at my place. Bring backup." I stared at the screen, heart hammering because I realized I'd crossed a line, and I didn't know if I could face the fallout. Ella's message arrived at 10 p.m., her usual calm tone cutting through my mounting anxiety. "I've got your back," she said. Just 4 words, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of friendship. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a breath. My lawyer wasn't just some back-office advisor. She was the kind of person who wouldn't flinch when the stakes got real. I forwarded her the injunction, my phone buzzing as I refocused on the mess Sabrina had left behind. But as I sank back into my chair trying to process everything, it hit me this wasn't just a breakup anymore. It wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was a reckoning. Sabrina's betrayal wasn't just about her stepping out on me, it was about everything I'd invested into this relationship. The love, the sacrifices, the quiet hours of code that I thought we were both contributing to. All of that had been consumed by her hunger for more, for status, for things that were supposed to be signs of success, but only revealed her emptiness. Her desire for a life made of expensive handbags and perfect Instagram photos had clouded her perception of what truly mattered. Partnership, mutual respect, trust. She was playing by a different set of rules, one that prioritized wealth and luxury over integrity and loyalty. She had never once questioned that what she was doing was wrong. I think she believed she could always just walk away from the damage without facing the consequences. The next morning, I called in sick to work. There was too much at stake, too much unraveling. I spent the entire day sitting in front of my laptop flicking through Sabrina's past, carefully piecing together the puzzle she'd tried so hard to keep hidden. I found more than just the DMs and hotel receipts. There were online purchases, luxury items tagged with specific notes, like for the trip with Matteo and a meticulously curated list of destinations in Europe she'd planned to visit on her own without me. I hadn't realized just how much she'd planned this whole thing, how she'd created a parallel life without me in it. The dress, the ring, the trips, they were all symbols of the life she'd discarded, each item reflecting her desire to be seen in a different light. But what I began to see in the process was that I wasn't just the one left behind. The entire system she'd built was a house of cards, fragile, self-serving, and empty. In the end, I wasn't the only one losing. She had sacrificed everything, love, trust, and her sense of identity for an illusion of success. And there, in the silent hours of the afternoon, it struck me I was already free. I no longer needed to prove my worth to her or anyone else. I didn't need her validation. The weight of that realization was both liberating and terrifying. My world had shifted without me realizing it, and now I stood on the precipice looking at everything that was left. It felt like staring at an open window in the middle of a storm, unsure whether to close it or step through. Ella arrived by evening with a stack of legal papers in hand, and we began strategizing. The quiet tension of the night had already seeped into my bones. We were setting the groundwork for the battle ahead, but all I could think about was what Sabrina's face would look like when everything came crashing down. Would she try to twist the story to her advantage? Would she play the victim, making me out to be the villain in front of everyone we knew? The fear that hung over me was less about the legal fight and more about how everyone would perceive this. Sabrina was a master at manipulation, but I wasn't a fool anymore. I had the receipts. I had the proof. It was all a game of patience now, waiting for her next move. The phone buzzed again. It was a message from my mom. I've spoken to Bob. He's still upset with you for sending the video. My mom and Bob had always gotten along, but I could sense the weight in her words. Bob, Sabrina's father, had been a good man, a man of integrity, but his loyalty was blinding him to the truth of his daughter's actions. I didn't respond right away, but I knew I had to prepare myself for whatever conversation awaited me. The tricky part was going to be handling Diane, Sabrina's mother. She had always been a thorn in my side, subtly critical, always pushing for more. The words she'd said about my lack of ambition had stung, but now they felt almost like a prelude to the game Sabrina was playing. Her parents were the ones who had enabled her behavior, perhaps unwittingly. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about a relationship falling apart. It was about the influence of a certain worldview that values material success over all else. Sabrina's family had raised her to chase status above all things, to see people not for who they were, but for what they could offer. To them, love was a transactional thing, just another line in a ledger. It was the world she was raised in, the world of appearances, of showing off. But I couldn't fight against the weight of her family's expectations alone. I had to think beyond the legal drama and confront the real issue. Sabrina had been raised to believe that love wasn't enough. And that was a battle I wasn't sure I was ready to fight. A knock on the door snapped me out of my thoughts. Mark entered holding a bottle of wine. "I thought we could use a little distraction," he said, flashing a rare grin. We both knew the game wasn't over yet, but for tonight, we'd share this small victory of silence. I poured a glass and stared at the streetlights from the window, my mind racing with every possible scenario. How long would she play the "I'm the victim" card? Would she show up at my door again, pleading for forgiveness, or would she just slink back into her shallow world, never facing what she'd done? The truth is, I was no longer afraid of her. What I feared now was the quiet aftermath, the emptiness of everything we'd shared, the looming question of whether I could ever trust again, not just in love, but in the idea of love. Could I build something real from this wreckage? Was there even room in my heart for that anymore? The night slipped by the weight of all that remained pressing on me. Tomorrow I would face Sabrina again. But this time it wouldn't be about saving her or salvaging what we had. This time it was about standing up for what was mine and walking away from everything that had tried to tear me down. The game had just begun. The day Sabrina came back to Eastwood felt like the calm before a storm, but with an eerie stillness hanging over everything. I'd made sure to mentally prepare myself, no more second-guessing, no more guilt. I'd done nothing wrong. This was her doing, not mine. Yet when I stood in front of the mirror that morning, I couldn't shake the sense that something had changed inside me. Maybe it was the exhaustion that had settled in my bones over the last few days, or maybe it was just the realization that I was for the first time no longer the person I thought I was. She had peeled away layers of my identity, forcing me to confront everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and loyalty. The life I thought I had been building now felt like it had been constructed on sand, temporary and fragile, ready to collapse at the first sign of a storm. I stood in my apartment staring at the dress she'd left behind, folded neatly in the back of the closet like a relic of a life that no longer existed. The deep green of the silk felt like a wound now, not the symbol of affection it once was. It reminded me of how easily she'd discarded everything we shared, as though it were disposable. As though I were disposable. That thought haunted me, but I knew better than to let it control me. I'd given Sabrina my best and she'd thrown it all away. I wasn't about to chase her through the wreckage. The day of reckoning was near, and I was ready. The knock on my door that afternoon wasn't unexpected. I could feel it in the air as the day dragged on, heavy, thick with anticipation. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Sabrina's footsteps had always sounded different from anyone else's, a slight tap of desperation hidden beneath the confident stride. I took a deep breath, walking toward the door, slowly, as if I could prolong the inevitable confrontation. I opened it, and there she was. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale from what I guessed had been days of crying, or some other calculated emotional ploy. She stood there in silence for a moment, probably assessing whether I'd show any signs of weakness. "I came to get my things," she said, her voice flat, almost rehearsed, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She wasn't the confident woman she'd once been, at least not the way she had once sold herself to me. This was the woman who had broken something precious, and now had to face the consequences of her actions. But I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Not anymore. I stepped aside and let her in, but I didn't say a word. She moved like she had a script running in her head, opening drawers, glancing around for what was hers, but I couldn't help but notice how everything had changed. The place had once been our home, quiet, lived in, comfortable, but now it felt like a shell. Something hollowed out, waiting to be abandoned. She gathered her things, but she didn't touch anything of value, the things that we'd invested in together. The new kitchen gadgets, the expensive speakers we'd picked out for the living room, they were all still here untouched. She took only the bare essentials, her clothes, her toiletries. A perfect metaphor for how little she had truly cared about what we'd built. As she moved toward the door, she paused. Her fingers brushed the edge of the countertop, and she took a deep breath. I could see her fighting to find the words, but there was nothing left to say. The damage had already been done. But still she tried. "You know you were never the one I wanted to be with," she muttered, almost as though speaking to herself, but loud enough for me to hear. I could have snapped, could have raged at her, but instead I stayed silent, watching her taking in every word. She thought she was the one who had power here, the one who was in control, but she couldn't even see how weak she had become. It wasn't about love anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. This was about understanding the game she had been playing all along and realizing I was no longer part of it. "You were just comfortable," she continued, her voice gaining a little more strength. "I wanted more. I want more, Alex. I don't want this life of mediocrity, of compromise. I don't want to be stuck here with you." And in that moment, I felt a pang of sadness. Not for the woman standing before me, but for the world she had chosen to live in, a world where success and material wealth were everything. A world that told her love was nothing more than a stepping stone on the way to a bigger, better version of herself. I had tried to fit into that world once, but I realized now that I wasn't the one who had been deluded. She was. She looked at me then. her gaze sharp, calculating, and I saw a flicker of something behind her eyes. Fear, maybe? The fear that comes when someone realizes they've made a mistake so large they can never undo it. But she didn't apologize. She never did. Instead, she turned and walked out as if the weight of our past had already been shed like a heavy coat. I closed the door behind her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the pressure release. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't anything but free. The walls that had once felt like a prison now stood as quiet sentinels guarding nothing but memories. She had wanted more, but in the end, she had lost everything. She had chased a dream of luxury and success, thinking that it could replace the quiet, honest things we had shared. But none of that was real. Not really. As the hours passed, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at the empty space where her things had been. The emptiness wasn't so bad anymore. It was just a reminder of how far I'd come, how much I'd grown. I'd been forced to shed the parts of me that had been afraid to stand up for myself, to speak my truth. But now all that was left was clarity. I could see things for what they were, not for what I had hoped they would be. And then just as I thought I could put this chapter behind me, my phone buzzed. A message from Bob. I know this has been hard on everyone, but I need you to know. Diane and I, we've talked. We understand now. We've been blind to what's really been happening with Sabrina. I'm sorry, Alex. I stared at the screen, the words slowly sinking in. Bob, the man I had respected for so long, now saw the truth. It wasn't about forgiving Sabrina or about reconciling with her. It was about understanding that I had never been the problem. I had been the one willing to fight for something real while she had been playing a game with no rules. But as I read the message again, something strange hit me. I didn't need their apology. This was my victory, my journey. And no one, not even Sabrina or her parents, could take that from me. It wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming myself, understanding that I was worth more than the lies she had told herself. And that was worth more than any apology. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Sabrina. But this time I didn't need to read it. I had already moved on. The life she had tried to build, the illusion of grandeur. It was gone, a mirage fading under the harsh light of truth. I had learned that I didn't need her or anyone to define my worth. I was enough. And with that, I turned off my phone, settled back into the silence of my apartment, and finally allowed myself to breathe.